I'm James Mitchell, 34, a devoted husband and financial advisor who believed in the power of trust and commitment. After 8 years of marriage, I held my wife's hand through 14 hours of labor, tears of joy streaming down my face as our first child entered the world. But when the nurse placed that beautiful baby in my arms, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The features, the skin tone, everything told a story that Sarah had been hiding from me for 9 months. What I discovered in the weeks that followed wouldn't just expose her betrayal, it would reveal a web of lies that ran deeper than I ever imagined, and force me to make a choice that would define the rest of our lives. Sometimes the greatest acts of love require the hardest decisions. If you've ever questioned everything you thought you knew about someone you loved, this story will resonate with your heart. Subscribe for more stories about finding truth in the midst of betrayal. The hospital wristband still sits on my nightstand, a plastic reminder of the day my world collapsed. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back when I believed Sarah and I had something unbreakable. Our wedding photo used to be the centerpiece of our living room mantel. Sarah in her flowing white dress, me in my navy suit, both of us radiating pure joy. We looked like a couple who would conquer the world together. For 7 years, I thought we were doing exactly that. We met in college. She was studying marketing. I was pursuing my finance degree. Sarah had this infectious laugh that could light up any room, and this way of making even the most ordinary moments feel special. When she said yes to my proposal on the beach in Monterey, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Our early years were everything I'd dreamed of. We bought our first house together, a charming 3-bedroom Victorian in the suburbs with a garden Sarah insisted we plant together. Every weekend we'd work side by side, her hands dirty from soil, talking about our future. We wanted children, lots of them. Sarah would joke about converting the spare bedrooms into a nursery and playroom. But month after month, year after year, the pregnancy tests came back negative. The fertility treatments began in our 5th year of marriage. Sarah handled the disappointment better than I did initially. She researched doctors, tracked ovulation cycles, changed our diets, and remained optimistic when I wanted to give up. Dr. Martinez at the fertility clinic became like family to us. Sarah would grip my hand during every appointment, her wedding ring pressing against my palm as we listened to test results and treatment options. "These things take time," Dr. Martinez would say, his kind eyes reflecting our frustration. "Many couples conceive naturally after they stop trying so hard." The treatments consumed us. Hormone injections that made Sarah emotional and exhausted. Scheduled intimacy that felt more clinical than romantic. Thousands of dollars in medical bills that I stressed over while Sarah remained focused on the goal. Our conversations revolved around basal temperatures and ovulation windows. Friends' pregnancy announcements became sources of pain rather than joy. After 3 years of failed treatments, we took a break. Sarah suggested we travel, rediscover ourselves as a couple without the pressure of conception hanging over us. We went to Italy, walked the streets of Rome hand in hand, made love in our hotel room without charts or schedules dictating the timing. For the first time in years, we just enjoyed being together. It was during this period that Sarah's career took off. She landed a position at Morrison & Associates, a prestigious marketing firm downtown. The job came with longer hours, client dinners, and business trips, but also the kind of professional fulfillment she'd been seeking. I was proud of her success, even when it meant more evenings alone and weekends when she worked from her laptop. "This promotion could change everything for us," she said, showing me the job offer over dinner. "The salary increase alone would cover another round of treatments if we decide to try again." I supported her decision completely. My own financial planning practice was growing steadily, and I could handle more of the household responsibilities. What mattered was that Sarah felt valued and challenged in her work. Then, 18 months ago, she came home glowing with news that seemed impossible. "James," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, "I'm pregnant." The pregnancy test sat on our bathroom counter, 2 pink lines as clear as day. I stared at it, afraid to believe what I was seeing. After years of negative tests, of hope followed by crushing disappointment, this felt surreal. "Are you sure?" I asked, taking her hands in mine. I took 3 tests. "They're all positive." Tears streamed down her face as she laughed. "We're going to have a baby, James. We're finally going to have our baby." I held her as we both cried, 8 years of dreams suddenly becoming reality. In that moment, surrounded by the love of my life in our bathroom that had witnessed so many disappointments, I felt complete. Every struggle, every failed treatment, every moment of doubt had led us to this miraculous moment. Looking back now, I realized that was the last time I felt truly, completely happy. Sarah's new phone arrived 3 weeks after we confirmed the pregnancy. She claimed her old iPhone was acting up, freezing during important client calls. The sleek black device became her constant companion, never more than arm's reach away. She'd clutch it protectively when I walked into the room, her thumb quickly swiping to close whatever she'd been viewing. "Work stuff," she'd say with a dismissive wave when I glanced at the screen. "You know how demanding the Peterson account has become." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Sarah had always been dedicated to her career, and pregnancy hadn't slowed her ambition. If anything, she seemed more driven than ever, eager to prove that expecting a baby wouldn't make her less committed to Morrison and Associates. But there were changes I couldn't ignore. Subtle shifts in the woman I'd known for over a decade. She started going to bed earlier, claiming pregnancy exhaustion. But I'd often wake up at 2 a.m. to find her scrolling through her phone, the blue glow illuminating her face in the darkness. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd quickly lock the screen and nestle against me. "Just checking emails." She'd whisper, "Go back to sleep." Her appetite changed too, and not just from pregnancy cravings. She'd always been a coffee lover, but suddenly she couldn't stand the smell. She developed a taste for spicy Thai food, something she'd never enjoyed before. When I suggested we order from our usual Italian place, she'd wrinkle her nose and suggest alternatives. "The baby wants pad Thai." She'd laugh, rubbing her growing belly. Who am I to argue with pregnancy cravings? The late nights at work increased. Sarah had always occasionally worked past 7, but now she was regularly coming home after 9, sometimes closer to 10. She'd arrive flushed and energetic rather than tired, claiming that a successful client presentation or breakthrough campaign strategy had her adrenaline pumping. "Marcus had this incredible idea for the Johnson campaign," she'd say, setting down her purse and immediately reaching for her phone to check messages. We stayed late brainstorming the creative direction. Marcus Rivera. I'd heard his name more frequently as Sarah's pregnancy progressed. He was a new hire, a creative director who'd joined Morrison and Associates around the time Sarah conceived. According to her, he was brilliant, innovative, exactly what their team needed to land bigger clients. "He has this fresh perspective," she'd explain when I'd casually ask about her colleagues. "He's worked with major brands in Chicago and New York, really sophisticated approach to brand storytelling. I met him once briefly at the company holiday party." Sarah was 5 months pregnant then, glowing in a fitted black dress that accentuated her bump. Marcus was tall, charismatic, with an easy smile and expensive suit. He complimented Sarah's work effusively, his hand lingering on her shoulder as he spoke about their successful campaigns. "Sarah's the most talented strategist I've worked with," he told me, his eyes never quite meeting mine. "You're lucky to have her." Something about the interaction felt off, though I couldn't articulate why. The way he looked at her, the familiarity in his touch, the inside jokes they shared about projects and clients. But Sarah was pregnant with our child, radiant with happiness about our growing family. My discomfort felt petty and unfounded. Her phone habits became increasingly secretive. She'd step out of rooms to take calls, saying they were work-related but speaking in hushed tones. She started showering with her phone on the bathroom counter, claiming she needed to be available for urgent client matters. The device had a complex passcode now, replacing the simple 4-digit sequence she'd used for years. "Company policy," she explained when I noticed. "New security protocols for client confidentiality." Weekend work sessions became common. Sarah would leave Saturday mornings for the office, returning home hours later with takeout food and stories about breakthrough creative sessions. She'd be energized rather than drained, talking animatedly about campaign concepts and client strategies while I prepared dinner. "Marcus thinks we should pitch the Morrison brand in a completely new direction," she'd say, her eyes bright with excitement. "Revolutionary approach to their market positioning." I supported her enthusiasm, proud of her professional growth and grateful that pregnancy hadn't dimmed her career ambitions. When she needed to travel for client meetings, I encouraged her to go. When weekend work required her attention, I handled household tasks without complaint. I was building my own financial planning practice and understood the demands of growing professionally. But late at night, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her typing on her phone. Quick, quiet taps followed by soft laughter or sharp intakes of breath. If I stirred, she'd immediately stop, pretending to sleep until my breathing returned to its regular rhythm. The physical changes in our relationship were subtle but persistent. She claimed pregnancy made her too tired for intimacy, which seemed reasonable given her expanding belly and increased work schedule. But she'd also grown distant in small ways. Less casual affection, fewer spontaneous kisses, a tendency to turn away when I tried to hold her close at night. "It's just the pregnancy," she'd say when I expressed concern. "My body doesn't feel like my own anymore." I accepted her explanations because I wanted to believe them. Sarah was carrying our miracle baby after years of fertility struggles. If she needed space to navigate the physical and emotional changes of pregnancy, I could provide that support. Looking back now, I realize I was seeing exactly what I wanted to see: a devoted wife balancing career success with our growing family. The alternative was unthinkable, so I convinced myself that my growing unease was just expectant father anxiety. But Sarah's phone remained her constant companion, and Marcus Rivera's name appeared in our conversations with increasing frequency. 2 weeks before her due date, she'd fall asleep clutching that phone, a small smile playing at her lips as she dreamed. Sarah's contractions started at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake, listening to her restless breathing, when she suddenly gripped my arm with surprising strength. "James," she whispered, her voice tight with pain. "I think it's time." The drive to St. Mary's Hospital felt surreal. After 9 months of anticipation, our baby was finally ready to join the world. Sarah sat beside me, breathing through contractions while I navigated the empty pre-dawn streets. Her phone buzzed twice during the 15-minute drive, but she ignored it, focused entirely on managing the pain. "I can't believe this is really happening," she said, reaching for my hand as another contraction peaked. After everything we've been through, the maternity ward at St. Mary's was quiet at that early hour. Nurse Patricia, a gentlewoman in her 50s, checked Sarah's progress and confirmed we were in active labor. 4 centimeters dilated, contractions coming every 3 minutes. This was real. They wheeled Sarah to room 312, a bright space with windows facing east toward the mountains. As the sun rose, painting the sky in soft pastels, I held Sarah's hand and coached her through breathing exercises we'd learned in our birthing class. She was incredibly strong, handling each wave of pain with determination and grace. "You're amazing," I told her, wiping sweat from her forehead with a cool cloth. "Our baby is so lucky to have you as a mother." She squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, James. Whatever happens, I want you to know that." Her words struck me as oddly intense, but labor makes people emotional. I kissed her forehead and whispered reassurances about our future together, the 3 of us becoming a family. The blank birth certificate sat on the bedside table, waiting to be filled with our child's information. Name, date of birth, parents' names, all the official details that would establish our baby's identity. I'd practiced signing my name as the father dozens of times, imagining this momentous occasion. Hours passed in a blur of contractions, ice chips, and encouraging words from our medical team. Dr. Chen, Sarah's obstetrician, checked her progress regularly, his calm demeanor helping us stay focused. By noon, Sarah was fully dilated and ready to push. "This is it," Dr. Chen said, positioning himself at the foot of the bed. "On the next contraction, I want you to give me a big push." I moved to Sarah's side, one arm supporting her back, the other holding her hand. She looked exhausted but determined, her hair damp with sweat, her face flushed with effort and anticipation. "I can see the head," Dr. Chen announced. "One more push, Sarah. Your baby is almost here." The final push seemed to last forever. Sarah's grip on my hand was fierce, her breathing ragged, every muscle in her body working to bring our child into the world. Then, suddenly, a cry filled the room, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. "Congratulations," Dr. Chen said, lifting a squirming pink baby. "You have a healthy baby boy." My heart exploded with joy. A son. Sarah and I had a son. I watched through tears as the medical team cleaned him. This perfect little person who was half me and half the woman I loved more than life itself. But as Nurse Patricia wrapped him in a soft blue blanket and turned to hand him to Sarah, my world stopped spinning. The baby's skin was several shades darker than either Sarah's or mine. His hair was black and curly, nothing like Sarah's straight blonde locks or my light brown waves. His facial features, even at just minutes old, seemed to echo someone else entirely. My hands trembled as Nurse Patricia placed him in my arms. He was beautiful, absolutely perfect, but he looked nothing like me, nothing like Sarah. This child, who I'd imagined and dreamed about for 9 months, bore no resemblance to either of his supposed parents. The room fell silent except for the baby's soft cries. I looked up to find Dr. Chen watching me carefully, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes showing understanding. Nurse Patricia busied herself with cleaning supplies, avoiding eye contact. The other medical staff suddenly found urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. I turned to Sarah, this precious baby still in my arms, and saw the truth written across her face. Her eyes were wide with fear, her skin pale despite the exertion of labor. She wasn't looking at our son with the wonder and joy I'd expected. She was looking at me, waiting for my reaction, braced for the inevitable questions. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the baby's crying. She reached for my hand, the same hand that had comforted her through labor, but I pulled away instinctively. The movement caused our son to fuss more, and I automatically began rocking him, my paternal instincts kicking in even as my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. "James, please," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Let me explain," but there was nothing to explain. The evidence was literally in my arms, this beautiful child who deserved none of the confusion and pain that adult choices had created. I looked down at him, his tiny fingers grasping at air, his dark eyes trying to focus on my face, and felt my heart break in two different directions. Part of me felt an immediate, overwhelming love for this innocent baby who needed protection and care. The other part of me felt the foundation of my marriage, my trust. My entire understanding of the past 9 months crumbling into dust. The blank birth certificate still sat on the bedside table, waiting for a father's signature that would legally bind me to a child who shared none of my DNA but all of my heart's capacity for love. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that moment, the baby in my arms. Sarah's terrified expression, the silence that filled room 312 as reality crashed over us all. The DNA test kit sat on our kitchen counter like an accusation. I'd bought it at the pharmacy on my way home from the hospital, my hands shaking as I placed it on the counter next to a bottle of Tylenol and a sympathy card from my sister. Such ordinary items surrounding something that would either restore my world or destroy it completely. Sarah had stayed at the hospital overnight for observation, claiming she needed rest after the difficult labor, but I knew she was buying time, preparing for the conversation we both knew was inevitable. The baby, our son, regardless of biology, was healthy and sleeping peacefully in the nursery. At least one of us deserved that peace. I made coffee at 5 a.m., though my hands were too unsteady to drink it. Instead, I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the DNA kit's clinical packaging, reading the instructions over and over. Cheek swab from alleged father, cheek swab from child, mail to laboratory, results in 3 to 5 business days. 3 to 5 days to confirm what I already knew in my heart. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Coming home this morning. We need to talk." I drove back to St. Mary's in silence, the DNA kit in my jacket pocket like a lead weight. Sarah was dressed and waiting when I arrived, holding our son with a tenderness that made my chest ache. Whatever else she had done, she loved this baby. That much was clear. The ride home was excruciating. She tried to make small talk about the baby's feeding schedule and the discharge instructions, but every word felt hollow. Our son slept peacefully in his car seat, blissfully unaware of the adult complications surrounding his arrival. Once we were home, I couldn't postpone the inevitable any longer. "Sarah," I said, setting the baby carrier on our living room coffee table, "we need to talk about what happened yesterday." She sat heavily on our couch, still wearing the hospital bracelet on her wrist. Her blonde hair was unwashed, her face pale and drawn. She looked fragile, vulnerable, and I had to remind myself that she was the one who had betrayed our marriage. "I know what you're thinking," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But James, I can explain." "Explain what?" I interrupted, pulling the DNA test kit from my pocket and setting it on the coffee table between us. "Explain why our son looks nothing like either of us. Explain why you've been secretive and distant for months. Explain who the father actually is." She stared at the test kit as if it were a snake coiled to strike. "You already bought one." I had to know for certain, but honestly, Sarah, we both know what the results will show. Tears began flowing down her cheeks. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been having an affair. Got pregnant with another man's child. And let me believe for 9 months that I was going to be a father." The words hung in the air between us, harsh and final. Our son stirred in his carrier, making soft baby noises that reminded us both of his innocent presence in this adult catastrophe. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this, but it did happen. You made choices, Sarah. For months, you made choices that led us to this moment." She looked up at me then, her eyes red and desperate. "I love you, James. I love our family. This doesn't have to change everything." "Our family?" I gestured toward the baby, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Sarah, he's not mine. Biologically, he's not mine. Biology doesn't make a father, she said quickly. You held him yesterday. I saw your face. You felt it too. That connection, that love, that's real, James. That matters more than DNA. She wasn't wrong. The moment I'd held him, despite my shock and confusion, I'd felt an overwhelming protective instinct. But that didn't erase the betrayal, the lies, the fundamental violation of trust that had brought us to this point. Who is he, Sarah? Who's the biological father? She closed her eyes, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Marcus Rivera. The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus, her brilliant colleague, the man whose ideas she'd praised for months, whose name had appeared in our conversations with increasing frequency, the man who'd complimented her work at the holiday party, his hand lingering on her shoulder. How long? I asked. We didn't. She struggled to find words. It started as just work, long hours on the Peterson campaign, then drinks after successful presentations. Then, how long, Sarah? 6 months, she whispered. The affair lasted 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, deception, and betrayal, while I supported her career and dreamed about our future family. 6 months of coming home to me after being with another man, of letting me believe we were trying to conceive when she was already pregnant with his child. Does he know? I asked. Does Marcus know the baby is his? She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. He knew when I found out I was pregnant, but James, he's married too. He has his own family. This was never about leaving you for him. It was just what? Just sex? Just excitement? Just a way to destroy 8 years of marriage for some temporary thrill? Our son began crying then, perhaps sensing the tension in the room. Sarah automatically reached for him, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. As she lifted him from his carrier and began rocking him gently, I saw the three of us as we were, a broken family held together by an innocent child who deserved better than the mess we adults had created. I'll take the test, I said quietly, watching her comfort the baby. We need official confirmation. But Sarah, you need to understand, this changes everything. Everything we built, everything we planned, everything I believed about us. It's all gone. She looked at me over the baby's head, her eyes pleading. It doesn't have to be gone. We can work through this. People overcome infidelity all the time. We can go to counseling. We can rebuild the trust. Can we? Can you honestly tell me that you're done with Marcus? That you can cut him out of your life completely? He works at your company, Sarah. He's the father of your child. How exactly do you propose we move forward? She had no answer for that. We both knew that Marcus would always be part of our lives now, one way or another. Every school play, every birthday party, every milestone in our son's life would potentially involve the man who had helped destroy our marriage. I stood up, suddenly feeling exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I need time to think. I need space to process this. Where will you go? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. My parents' house for now. But Sarah, don't mistake this for temporary. What you've done, what you've hidden from me, it's not something I can just forgive and forget. As I packed a bag in our bedroom, I could hear her crying downstairs, murmuring soft words to the baby. Our bed, where we'd made love and shared our dreams, felt like a stranger's now. Everything in our house carried the weight of deception. Before I left, I looked at the DNA test kit one more time. 3 to 5 business days to confirm what we already knew. 3 to 5 days to officially end the life I thought I was living and begin figuring out what came next. Marcus Rivera's business card had been sitting in Sarah's purse for months. I found it while helping her gather baby supplies from her hospital bag. A crisp white card with elegant black lettering. Marcus Rivera, Creative Director, Morrison & Associates. His personal cell phone number was handwritten on the back in Sarah's familiar script. I stared at that card. This small piece of paper that represented the destruction of everything I'd believed about my life. Marcus Rivera, the man whose name had peppered Sarah's conversations for the better part of a year. The brilliant colleague with fresh perspectives and innovative ideas. The father of the baby sleeping peacefully upstairs. Sarah found me in the kitchen, holding his business card like evidence in a criminal case. You kept his card, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. She stopped in the doorway, her hand instinctively moving to adjust the baby monitor clipped to her shirt. James, please don't tell me about him. Really tell me this time. Not the sanitized work colleague version you've been feeding me for months. She moved carefully to the kitchen island, keeping distance between us. The morning light streaming through our windows seemed too bright for this conversation, too cheerful for the darkness we were navigating. He joined Morrison & Associates about 14 months ago, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He came from a major agency in Chicago, had worked with some impressive national brands. Richard Morrison hired him specifically to elevate our creative department. When did it start? The attraction or the affair? The clinical way she separated those two concepts told me everything I needed to know about how she'd justified her choices, as if attraction was innocent, natural, something that just happened to married people. Both. She closed her eyes, as if seeing the past more clearly in darkness. I noticed him immediately. He was confident, charismatic, different from the other men at the firm. He had this way of looking at creative challenges that was completely fresh, and he is very handsome. I felt my jaw clench, but I forced myself to remain silent. The attraction was immediate, but I ignored it. I'm married, I love my husband. I don't act on those kinds of feelings. But we were assigned to the Peterson campaign together, and it required long hours, late nights. We'd order dinner to the office, work until 9 or 10, then sometimes grab a drink to decompress. When did you first sleep with him? The directness of my question seemed to surprise her. She flinched as if I'd struck her. 8 months ago. We just landed the Peterson account, our biggest client win of the year. The whole team went out to celebrate, but most people left early. Marcus and I stayed, talking about future projects, about our careers, about life. We were both a little drunk and the conversation got personal. Personal how? He told me about his marriage troubles. His wife Elena, she's a pediatric surgeon, works incredible hours. They'd been growing apart for years. He said he felt invisible in his own home, that success in his career couldn't fill the emptiness in his personal life. I almost laughed at the irony. Here I was, thinking I was supporting Sarah's career ambitions, proud of her professional growth while she was bonding with another man over feeling neglected and misunderstood. And you told him about our fertility struggles? Not at first, but over time, yes. He was sympathetic, understanding. He said he and Elena had discussed children, but her career always took precedence. He made me feel heard in a way that she stopped herself, realizing how her words sounded, in a way that I didn't. That's not what I meant. But it's what you felt. Otherwise, why would you confide in him instead of talking to me about whatever was missing in our marriage? She had no answer for that, which was answer enough. I'd been so focused on building our financial future, supporting her career, managing the practical aspects of our life together, that I'd missed her emotional needs. But that didn't excuse betrayal. That didn't justify deception. The first time we slept together was in his hotel room after a client presentation in San Francisco. I felt guilty immediately afterward, promised myself it would never happen again. But then there were more late nights, more opportunities, and the guilt started fading. 6 months, you said. How often? James, please, how often, Sarah? I need to understand the scope of what you did. Once a week? Daily? Was I sleeping next to you after you'd been with him? She began crying again, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no desire to comfort her. Just a cold need for complete truth. Maybe twice a week, sometimes more when we traveled together for client meetings. Never in our house, never in our bed. Usually his apartment or hotel rooms. His apartment. Marcus had his own place, somewhere they could conduct their affair in private while I worked late at my office, building financial plans for families like the one I thought we were creating. Does his wife know? No, at least I don't think so. Elena works so much that she barely notices when he's home late. And when you found out you were pregnant? Sarah's tears came harder now. I knew immediately it wasn't yours. We hadn't been intimate in weeks because of my work schedule, but Marcus and I had been together just days before I missed my period. The timeline clicked into place with sickening clarity. The night she'd come home glowing with the pregnancy news, I'd been ecstatic about our miracle baby. She'd already known the child wasn't mine. You let me believe for 9 months that I was going to be a father. You are going to be a father. Biology don't, I cut her off sharply. Don't you dare try to minimize what you've done by claiming biology doesn't matter. If it doesn't matter, why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? She had no answer because we both knew the truth. She'd let me believe the baby was mine because it was easier than facing the consequences of her choices. Easier than destroying our marriage and facing an uncertain future as a single mother. Easier than telling Marcus's wife about the affair and watching his family implode too. What does Marcus want now? Does he want to be involved in the baby's life? He's confused, torn between his responsibility to Elena and their children and his feelings about our son. Our son. Even now, even knowing the truth, Sarah insisted on calling the baby ours. Part of me understood why. I'd felt that immediate connection too, that protective instinct that transcended biology. But the larger part of me felt betrayed by every pronoun, every assumption of shared parenthood. He has other children? 2, a daughter who's 12 and a son who's 9. Elena doesn't know about the affair or the baby. Marcus is terrified of losing them. So Marcus Rivera was a father twice over, sneaking around behind his surgeon wife's back while maintaining the facade of a stable family man. The hypocrisy was staggering, but it also revealed something important. He had as much to lose as Sarah did. Maybe more. Where do things stand between you two now? It's over. The affair, I mean. It ended when I told him about the pregnancy. We both knew it had gone too far, gotten too complicated. He's trying to save his marriage, and I'm trying to save ours. I looked at his business card again, at his handwritten phone number on the back. This man who'd helped create the child sleeping upstairs, who'd shared intimate moments with my wife, who knew details about our private struggles that he had no right to know, but he works with you. You see him every day. We're professional now, polite but distant. He's actually requested a transfer to Morrison's Denver office. He wants to put physical distance between us. Marcus Rivera, the brilliant creative director, running away from the consequences of his choices, just like Sarah had tried to hide from hers. At least he had the self-awareness to recognize that proximity would make things impossible for everyone involved. I slipped his business card into my wallet, not because I intended to call him, not yet. Anyway, but because I needed a tangible reminder of how completely my life had been upended by people I'd trusted. James, Sarah said softly, what happens now? I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for over a decade, mother of a child who carried another man's DNA but somehow still felt connected to my heart. Now I figure out if there's anything left of our marriage worth saving. Rebecca Walsh's business card was cream-colored with gold lettering, the kind of understated elegance that suggested competence and discretion. Family law attorney was printed beneath her name, along with credentials that included Harvard Law School and 23 years of practice specializing in divorce and custody matters. I'd gotten her name from Tom Harrison, a client whose own divorce had been finalized the previous year. Rebecca's tough but fair, he'd told me over coffee. She'll tell you the truth, even when you don't want to hear it. Her downtown office occupied the 15th floor of a glass building that overlooked the harbor. The waiting room was furnished in warm browns and deep blues, designed to feel more like a comfortable living room than a lawyer's office. Still, I felt like I was sitting in a waiting room for surgery, preparing for an operation that would either save my life or end it. Mr. Mitchell, a woman in her early 50s, appeared in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a neat chignon. She wore a navy blazer and had kind but intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'm Rebecca Walsh. Please come in. Her office was spacious but not ostentatious, with diplomas and family photos sharing wall space with legal texts and case law volumes. She gestured to a comfortable chair across from her desk, then settled into her own chair with a yellow legal pad and pen. Tom Harrison referred you, she said, getting straight to business. He mentioned you're dealing with a paternity situation. I'd rehearsed this conversation during the drive downtown, but actually saying the words out loud felt surreal. My wife had an affair. She gave birth 3 days ago to a child that's clearly not mine biologically. I need to understand my legal options and obligations. Rebecca's expression remained professionally neutral, though I caught a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. She'd obviously heard variations of this story many times before. Let's start with the immediate legal situation, she said, making notes on her pad. Are you listed as the father on the birth certificate? Yes. I signed it at the hospital before I fully processed what I was seeing. The shock, the medical staff waiting, I just signed automatically. That's actually quite common in situations like this. The legal presumption in our state is that a husband is the father of any child born to his wife during the marriage. Your signature on the birth certificate establishes legal paternity regardless of biological paternity. The distinction between legal and biological paternity was something I'd never considered before. What does that mean practically? It means you're currently the legal father with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Child support, custody rights, decision-making authority regarding the child's welfare. The biological father, even if proven through DNA testing, has no automatic legal rights. I felt a strange mix of relief and burden at this information. Legal fatherhood meant I had some control over the situation, but it also meant potential financial obligations that could last 18 years. What if I want to challenge paternity? Rebecca leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. That's certainly possible, but there are time limitations and specific procedures. In this state, you have 2 years from the child's birth to challenge paternity, but it's much easier to do it within the first 60 days. And if I successfully challenge it, your legal obligations would end, but so would your rights. You'd have no automatic claim to custody or visitation. The biological father could potentially establish his rights, or your wife could file for support from him instead. The complexity was staggering. Every choice led to a different set of consequences, not just for me, but for Sarah and the baby. What about divorce proceedings? How does the paternity question affect those? It can complicate things significantly, Rebecca admitted. Property division, spousal support, child custody, all of these issues become more complex when paternity is disputed. However, it can also be relevant in determining fault grounds for divorce if your state recognizes those. She pulled out a thick folder and began explaining the intricacies of divorce law in our state. No-fault divorce based on irreconcilable differences versus fault-based divorce citing adultery. The financial implications of each approach. The likelihood of securing spousal support given the circumstances of the marriage breakdown. Here's what I need you to understand, James, she said, using my first name for the first time. The legal system tries to protect the best interests of children above all else. Even if you successfully challenge paternity, there may be expectations that you maintain some financial responsibility if you've acted as the father figure, even if the child isn't biologically mine. Even then, courts look at the totality of the situation, your role in the child's life, your emotional and financial investment, the child's attachment to you. The law recognizes that parenthood isn't solely about biology. I thought about holding the baby in the hospital, that immediate protective instinct I'd felt despite my shock and confusion. Even now, 3 days later, I found myself wondering how he was doing, whether he was sleeping well, if Sarah was managing the feeding schedule. What about the biological father's obligations? That's where things get complicated. If he's married to someone else, as you've indicated, establishing his paternity could have significant legal and financial consequences for his existing family. He might fight any attempt to establish biological paternity. And if he doesn't want to be involved, the court can compel DNA testing and establish support obligations regardless of his wishes. Biology creates certain legal responsibilities that can't be avoided simply by pretending they don't exist. Rebecca walked me through the various scenarios and timelines. Filing for divorce would take several months to finalize. Challenging paternity could be done simultaneously but required specific legal procedures. The division of assets accumulated during our 8-year marriage would follow state guidelines unless we could reach an amicable agreement. How much is this going to cost? I asked, dreading the answer. Depends on how contested the proceedings become. If your wife cooperates and the biological father doesn't fight paternity establishment, we're looking at somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000. If there are custody battles or complex asset disputes, it could be significantly more. The financial reality hit me like a punch to the gut. Not only was I facing the emotional devastation of divorce and betrayal, but it would cost me a small fortune to legally extricate myself from the situation. I need time to think about this, I said, feeling overwhelmed by the choices and consequences. Of course. But James, don't wait too long. Some of these time limitations are strict, and evidence can disappear or become harder to obtain as time passes. She handed me several documents. Retainer agreements, information about divorce procedures, a list of questions to consider before making final decisions about challenging paternity. One more thing, she said as I prepared to leave. Have you considered mediation or counseling before pursuing divorce? I'm not suggesting you should reconcile. That's not my place to say. But sometimes having a neutral, third party help you work through the emotional aspects can clarify what you want the legal outcome to be. I took her business card and slipped it into my wallet next to Marcus Rivera's. 2 cards representing 2 very different paths forward, one toward confronting the man who'd helped destroy my marriage, the other toward legally ending that marriage altogether. Thank you, Rebecca. I'll be in touch soon. As I rode the elevator down to street level, I realized that understanding my legal options hadn't made my choices any clearer. If anything, the complexity of family law had shown me just how many different ways this situation could unfold, each with its own set of gains and losses. The baby was legally mine, but biologically Marcus's. I could challenge paternity and walk away financially free, but lose any right to be involved in his life. I could pursue an expensive divorce that might take years to finalize, or attempt mediation that might not address the fundamental breach of trust. Standing on the sidewalk outside Rebecca's building, watching people hurry past with their own complicated lives, I realized that legal advice could tell me what was possible, but it couldn't tell me what was right. The baby's first photo sat on my parents' kitchen table, printed on glossy photo paper that Sarah had dropped off that morning, along with a desperate handwritten note. In the image, he was sleeping peacefully, his tiny fist curled near his cheek, completely unaware of the adult chaos surrounding his arrival into this world. I'd been staying at my childhood home for 5 days now, sleeping in my old bedroom with its faded baseball posters and high school trophies. My mother had quietly prepared the space, changing the sheets and stocking the dresser with fresh towels, asking no questions about how long I might need to stay. But the photo drew me back to the hospital, back to the moment when this innocent child had been placed in my arms. I needed to see him again, to understand what I was truly walking away from if I chose to challenge paternity and pursue divorce. St. Mary's Hospital felt different during afternoon visiting hours. The maternity ward buzzed with excited grandparents and proud fathers, balloons and flower arrangements creating a festive atmosphere that contrasted sharply with my internal turmoil. I'd called ahead to ensure Sarah wouldn't be there. She'd mentioned a doctor's appointment for her postpartum checkup. Nurse Patricia recognized me immediately. "Mr. Mitchell, how nice to see you. Are you here to visit your son?" Your son. 2 words that carried so much weight, so much assumption about biology and legal responsibility and emotional connection. I nodded, unsure how to correct her, or even whether I should. The nursery was behind large glass windows, rows of tiny bassinets holding sleeping babies in various stages of alertness. I found him easily. Baby boy Mitchell. According to the card at the foot of his bassinet, he was awake, his dark eyes unfocused but alert, tiny fingers moving in what seemed like random patterns. "Would you like to hold him?" Nurse Patricia asked, already moving to unlock the nursery door. Before I could answer, she was leading me to a comfortable rocking chair in a quiet corner of the nursery. The baby fussed slightly as she lifted him from his bassinet, but settled immediately when she placed him in my arms. He was heavier than I remembered, more solid and real. His skin was warm, and I could feel his steady heartbeat against my chest. Those dark eyes that had initially shocked me now seemed to study my face with infant intensity, as if he was trying to memorize my features. "He knows you," Nurse Patricia said softly. "Babies recognize the voices and heartbeats they heard in the womb. He's been listening to you talk to his mother for months." The observation hit me like a physical blow. This child had heard me singing to Sarah's belly, reading aloud from baby books, talking about our future as a family. To him, I was as much his father as anyone could be. The DNA results wouldn't change the months of connection we'd already formed. I began rocking gently, and he relaxed further into my arms. His breathing was steady and peaceful, the kind of absolute trust that only babies can give. He didn't know about affairs or betrayals or legal complications. He only knew that someone was holding him safely, speaking to him in gentle tones, providing the comfort and security all children need. "Hello, little one," I whispered, surprised by the emotion in my own voice. "You're going to be okay, no matter what happens. I want you to know that." As if responding to my words, he made a soft cooing sound and turned his head slightly toward my voice. The gesture was so natural, so instinctive, that I felt my carefully constructed emotional walls beginning to crumble. "He's beautiful," I told Nurse Patricia, who was observing from a respectful distance. "He is, and he's lucky to have someone who cares about him so much." I looked down at him again. This perfect little person who deserved none of the complicated emotions and legal battles that adult choices had created. His parents might be flawed, might have made terrible decisions that hurt each other and damaged trust, but he was innocent, pure, worthy of love and protection regardless of whose DNA had created him. "Can I ask you something?" I said to Nurse Patricia. "Of course. In your experience, does it matter? Biology, I mean. When it comes to being a father?" She considered the question carefully before answering. "I've been working in maternity for 15 years. I've seen biological fathers who couldn't be bothered to visit their children. And I've seen adoptive fathers who would move mountains for kids they didn't create. Love isn't about genetics. Mr. Mitchell, it's about choice, commitment, and showing up every day." Her words echoed what my mother had written in her note. Family isn't always about blood, but they also highlighted the fundamental question I was wrestling with. Could I choose to love and commit to this child despite the betrayal that had created him? I spent another hour in the nursery, holding him while he slept, changing his diaper when he fussed, feeding him a bottle when the nurses indicated it was time. Every interaction felt natural, instinctive, like muscle memory from some paternal programming I didn't know I possessed. When it was time to leave, placing him back in his bassinet felt like a small betrayal. He looked up at me with those dark, unfocused eyes, and I felt a pull in my chest that had nothing to do with legal obligations or DNA tests. "I'll see you soon," I promised him, though I wasn't sure if that was true. Walking back to my car, I realized that visiting him hadn't provided clarity about my marriage or my legal options. If anything, it had complicated things further, because now I knew with certainty that my feelings for this child transcended biology. transcended the circumstances of his conception. But loving him didn't automatically mean I could forgive Sarah's betrayal or rebuild trust in our marriage. And it didn't resolve the practical questions about Marcus Rivera's role in his son's life, or the financial and legal implications of the choices I had to make. The baby's first photo was still in my jacket pocket when I returned to my parents' house. I set it on the dresser in my childhood bedroom, next to my high school graduation picture and a trophy from my senior year debate team. 3 different stages of my life, each representing a different version of who I thought I would become. Now I had to figure out who I was going to be going forward, for myself, for Sarah, and for an innocent child whose future depended partly on the choices I made in the coming days. My mother's handwritten note arrived on cream-colored stationery, her careful cursive filling both sides of the paper. She'd slipped it under my bedroom door sometime during the night, after I'd returned from visiting the baby at the hospital. The paper still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume when I found it the next morning. "My dearest James," it began, "I've been thinking about what you told us yesterday, about Sarah and the baby, and the impossible situation you're facing. Your father and I want you to know that we love you and support whatever decision you make, but I hope you'll consider some thoughts from someone who's lived a bit longer and seen a few more complicated situations than you have." I settled into the window seat in my childhood bedroom, the same spot where I'd done homework and read books throughout high school, and continued reading her elegant script. "Family isn't always about blood. Your Aunt Margaret adopted 3 children after her own fertility struggles, and I've never seen a more devoted mother or more loved children. Your cousin David never knew his biological father, but your Uncle Tom raised him with such dedication that no one ever questioned who David's real father was. Love creates family, James, not genetics." She wrote about my grandmother, who'd helped raise her neighbor's children during the Depression when their parents couldn't care for them, about friends who'd become family through choice and commitment rather than accident of birth, about the difference between being a father and being a donor. "What Sarah did to you in your marriage is unforgivable," the note continued. "The betrayal, the lies, the months of deception. These are wounds that may never fully heal, but that innocent baby didn't choose any of this. He didn't ask to be conceived in betrayal or born into chaos. What happens between you and Sarah is one question. What happens between you and that child is entirely separate." I could hear my mother's voice in every word, the same gentle wisdom she'd offered throughout my childhood when I'd faced difficult decisions or moral dilemmas. She'd always helped me separate the emotional complexity from the fundamental questions of right and wrong. "Whatever you decide, we'll support you. If you choose to divorce Sarah and walk away from legal responsibility for the baby, we'll understand. If you choose to love that child regardless of his DNA, we'll welcome him as our grandson. Family is what we make it, sweetheart." I was still processing her words when I heard voices downstairs. My father talking to someone at the front door. Within minutes, my sister Rachel appeared in my doorway, still wearing her nurse's scrubs from the night shift at Portland General. "Mom called me," she said without preamble, settling cross-legged on my bed like we were teenagers again. "She said you needed to talk to family." Rachel was 2 years younger than me, but had always possessed an emotional intelligence that made her seem older. As a pediatric nurse, she dealt with family crises and complicated situations regularly. If anyone could offer practical perspective on my situation, it was her. "How are you holding up?" she asked, studying my face with professional concern. "I don't know. Some moments I'm furious with Sarah, ready to file for divorce and never look back. Other times I hold that baby and feel like walking away would be the cruelest thing I could do." "Tell me about holding him." So I did. I described the weight of him in my arms, the way he'd settled immediately when I'd rocked him, his dark eyes studying my face with infant intensity. Rachel listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "Do you love him?" she asked when I finished. "Yes, God help me, yes." "And that makes everything so much more complicated." "Why does loving him complicate things?" "Because if I love him, shouldn't I stay married to Sarah to provide him with a stable family? But if I stay married to Sarah, how do I ever trust her again? How do we build anything real on a foundation of betrayal?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment, processing the complexity. "James, let me ask you something as someone who works with children every day. What do kids need most to thrive? Love, security, stability." "Exactly. And can you provide those things as a divorced man who maintains a relationship with his child? Or do you have to be married to the child's mother to be a good father?" The question reframed everything I'd been struggling with. I'd been operating under the assumption that staying married was the only way to be present in the baby's life, but that wasn't necessarily true. "Sarah's parents came by yesterday," she continued. Mom didn't want to tell you because she knew it would upset you, but I think you should know. My stomach tightened. Sarah's parents, Linda and Robert Chen, had always been kind to me, but I'd been dreading the inevitable conversation about their daughter's choices. They're devastated. James. Linda was crying, kept asking Mom what they'd done wrong, how they'd failed to raise Sarah with better values. Robert was furious, talking about how this reflects on their family's reputation in the community. What did Mom tell them? The truth. That good parents can raise children who make terrible choices, and that Sarah's actions are her responsibility, not theirs. But she also told them that you're struggling with what to do about the baby. And Linda broke down completely. I could imagine Sarah's mother, a gentle woman who'd treated me like a son for 8 years, grappling with the destruction her daughter had caused. She begged Mom to convince you not to abandon the baby. Rachel continued. She said she knows you have every right to walk away, but that losing you would be like losing a grandson twice over. The emotional manipulation was obvious, but I understood Linda's desperation. She was watching her daughter's marriage implode and potentially losing the only grandchild she might ever have. Dad wants to talk to you too, Rachel said. He's been pacing around the house for days trying to figure out how to help without interfering. As if summoned by her words, my father appeared in the doorway. Robert Mitchell, retired Army colonel, still carried himself with military bearing at 62. But his face showed the strain of watching his son navigate an impossible situation. Mind if I join you? He asked. Please. He settled into my desk chair, the same one where he'd helped me with homework and listened to teenage problems years earlier. I've been thinking about leadership, he said, which was how he approached most difficult conversations, about the difference between making decisions based on emotion versus making them based on principle. What do you mean? In the military, we sometimes face situations where every choice led to casualties. Good people were going to get hurt no matter what we decided. The question wasn't how to avoid pain. That was impossible. The question was how to minimize harm while staying true to our values. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. So what are your values, son? What principles do you want to guide your decisions? Honesty, loyalty, protecting people who can't protect themselves. Good. Now apply those principles to your situation. Sarah violated honesty and loyalty, but that baby is someone who can't protect himself. What does that tell you about your responsibility? That I should protect him, even if that means staying in a broken marriage? Not necessarily. You can protect him and still hold Sarah accountable for her choices. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Rachel nodded agreement. James, you don't have to choose between loving that baby and respecting yourself. You can do both. My father stood and moved to the window, looking out at the garden where my mother was tending her roses. Your mother's right about family being a choice. I've commanded men who weren't related to me, but who I would have died for. I've seen biological families that were toxic and destructive. Blood doesn't make family, son. Character does. Commitment does. So what are you saying? He turned back to me, his expression serious but kind. I'm saying that whatever you decide about Sarah, decide about that baby separately. Don't let her betrayal cost an innocent child the father he deserves. The three of us sat in comfortable silence, processing the weight of family wisdom and unconditional support. My mother's note lay on the bed between us, her words about love creating family resonating with everything my father and sister had shared. Thank you, I said finally. All of you. For not judging, for not trying to make the decision for me, for just being here. Rachel squeezed my hand. That's what family does. Real family. After they left, I reread my mother's note, focusing on her final paragraph. Whatever you decide, we'll support you. Family is what we make it, sweetheart. For the first time since leaving the hospital, I felt like I had a framework for moving forward. Sarah's betrayal was one problem that needed addressing. The baby's future was a separate issue that deserved separate consideration. I didn't have to sacrifice my self-respect to be a good father, and I didn't have to abandon an innocent child to hold Sarah accountable for her choices. Family, as my mother wrote, is what we make it. Marcus Rivera's resignation letter lay on his desk when I arrived at Morrison & Associates the following Monday morning. The security guard in the lobby recognized me from company events and waved me through without question, assuming I was there to see Sarah. Instead, I took the elevator to the 14th floor, where the creative department occupied a modern open-plan workspace filled with design boards and conference rooms. I'd called ahead, asking the receptionist if Marcus was available for a brief meeting. She'd checked his calendar and confirmed he had 15 minutes before his next client presentation. What she didn't know was that I wasn't a potential client. I was the husband of the woman whose affair had produced his child. Marcus was in his corner office, a glass-walled space that overlooked the city's financial district. He was studying layout mock-ups when his assistant announced my arrival, but I could see the moment recognition and panic crossed his face. He stood quickly, smoothing his tie and attempting to compose himself. "James," he said, extending his hand in an automatic gesture of professional courtesy. "This is unexpected." I didn't take his hand. Instead, I closed his office door and activated the privacy setting that frosted the glass walls. Whatever conversation we were about to have didn't need witnesses. "We need to talk," I said. Settling into the chair across from his desk without being invited, Marcus remained standing, clearly uncomfortable with the power dynamics of the situation. He was taller than me, probably more athletic, with the kind of confident bearing that had undoubtedly attracted Sarah's attention. But right now he looked like a man caught in a lie, uncertain how to proceed. "James, I want you to know that I never intended—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Before you give me whatever speech you've rehearsed about how sorry you are, I want you to understand something. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because you helped create a child, and that child deserves better than two cowards running away from their responsibilities." He sat down heavily, his professional composure cracking. "What do you want from me?" "I want the truth, all of it. No corporate speak, no damage control, no sanitized version designed to minimize your guilt. I want to understand how you justified sleeping with another man's wife for 6 months. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that reminded me uncomfortably of Sarah when she was nervous. It wasn't supposed to happen. Sarah and I were working late on the Peterson campaign, and we developed a friendship that became more. That's an interesting euphemism for betrayal. You're right, it was betrayal. Of my marriage, of your marriage, of professional ethics. There's no excuse for what we did, but you did it anyway. For 6 months you did it anyway." He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "My marriage has been struggling for years. Elena and I barely speak anymore, barely see each other with her surgical schedule and my client demands. Sarah understood the pressure of building a career while trying to maintain a personal life. So you bonded over feeling neglected and decided adultery was the solution? It wasn't that calculated. It developed gradually, longer conversations, shared dinners, emotional intimacy that became physical intimacy. By the time I recognized how far it had gone, I was already in too deep. I studied his office while he spoke, taking in the family photos on his desk. A beautiful woman with dark hair, who must be Elena. 2 children with his eyes and her smile. Vacation pictures from ski trips and beach holidays. The portrait of a successful family living the American dream. "Tell me about your wife." The request seemed to surprise him. "Elena?" "Yes, Elena, the woman you were married to while you were sleeping with mine. She's an incredible person. Pediatric surgeon, brilliant, dedicated to helping children. She works 60-hour weeks because she believes in what she's doing. And your children?" "Sophia's 12, Miguel's 9. They're amazing kids. Sophia's got Elena's intelligence, wants to be a doctor like her mother. Miguel's artistic, always drawing or building something. Do they know about the affair?" "God, no. Elena doesn't know either. I've managed to keep this separate from my family life. Separate." I repeated the word with obvious skepticism. "You've fathered another woman's child, but you've kept it separate from your family life." Marcus flinched as if I'd struck him. "I know how it sounds. It sounds like you want all the benefits of being a family man, comfortable life. That's not, I'm trying to do the right thing here." "Really? What exactly is the right thing, Marcus? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're planning to transfer to Denver and pretend none of this ever happened." He gestured toward the resignation letter on his desk. "I requested the transfer to make things easier for everyone. Sarah and I can't continue working together after what happened. The temptation, the complications. It's better if there's distance. Better for whom? You, Sarah? Because it's certainly not better for your son." "He's not," Marcus started to say, then stopped himself. "He's not what?" "Not your son. The DNA test will prove otherwise. Not your responsibility? Biology says different." Marcus stood and walked to his window, staring out at the city below. "What do you want me to do, James?" "Elena doesn't know about the affair. If she finds out, it will destroy my family. Sophia and Miguel will lose their stable home, their trust in their father. Is that really what's best for everyone?" "I'm not concerned with what's best for everyone. I'm concerned with what's right for one innocent baby who didn't ask to be born into this situation, and what would be right for him. Having his biological father destroy his existing family to acknowledge a child conceived in betrayal?" The question highlighted the impossible complexity of the situation. Marcus had 2 other children who deserved stability and a father they could respect. But he also had a newborn son who deserved acknowledgement and support. I don't have answers for you, Marcus. But I know that running away to Denver isn't a solution, it's avoidance. What would you do in my position? I considered the question carefully before answering. I'd tell my wife the truth. I'd face the consequences of my choices instead of expecting other people to manage them for me. And I'd figure out how to be responsible for all my children, not just the ones that are convenient. Marcus returned to his desk and picked up one of the family photos. His daughter Sophia smiling at the camera during what looked like a school play. She wants to be a doctor like her mother. She talks about the children she'll help someday, the difference she'll make in the world. How do I tell her that her father is the kind of man who destroys families? Maybe by showing her that her father is the kind of man who takes responsibility for his mistakes and tries to make things right. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of choices and consequences. Marcus's resignation letter represented his plan to escape accountability, but my visit had forced him to confront the reality that geography wouldn't solve moral obligations. The transfer request, he said finally. I could withdraw it, stay in town, figure out how to be involved in the baby's life. That's between you and Sarah. And eventually, it will be between you and your son when he's old enough to ask questions about his father. Marcus nodded, his decision apparently made. I'll withdraw the transfer request. I'll tell Elena about the affair. I can't promise our marriage will survive it, but she deserves to know the truth. And the baby? I'll support him financially, legally establish paternity, if that's what you and Sarah decide is best. I won't be father of the year, but I won't be a deadbeat either. I stood to leave, our business concluded. Marcus, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. It's going to be complicated and painful, but it's right. He looked up at me with something resembling gratitude mixed with terror. James, I know I have no right to ask this, but what are you going to do? About Sarah? About the baby? I'm going to do what you're going to do. I'm going to face the consequences of choices, hers and mine, and figure out how to move forward with integrity. As I left Morrison and Associates, I realized that confronting Marcus hadn't provided the satisfaction I'd expected. He wasn't the villain I'd imagined, just a flawed man who'd made terrible choices and was now trying to figure out how to live with the consequences. In that way, we weren't so different. His resignation letter would likely be withdrawn by end of business. Elena Rivera would learn some difficult truths about her marriage. And somewhere in the city, an innocent baby would have 2 imperfect men trying to figure out how to be the fathers he deserved. Sarah's diary had been hidden beneath a stack of pregnancy books on her nightstand, a leather-bound journal I'd never noticed during the months of anticipation and preparation. She handed it to me herself when I returned to the house to collect more clothes, her fingers trembling as she placed it in my hands. I want you to read this, she said, her voice hoarse from crying. All of it. I know you hate me, and you have every right to. But I need you to understand that it was never about not loving you. The diary's pages were filled with her familiar handwriting, entries dating back nearly a year. I'd intended to just grab some clothes and leave, but something about her desperate expression made me sit down in our living room, the same room where we'd planned our nursery, where we'd celebrated the pregnancy news, where we'd built what I thought was a life together. Marcus came to see me yesterday, she continued, settling carefully into the chair across from me. He told me about your conversation, about his decision to tell Elena the truth and stay in town. I opened the diary to a random page, dated 4 months ago. James is working late again, preparing for the Harrison merger. I should be supportive, but I feel so lonely lately. The pregnancy is making me emotional, and Marcus has been so understanding about everything I'm going through. You wrote about him, I said, scanning more entries. A lot. Read it all, James, please. The good parts and the bad parts and the parts that will hurt you more than anything you've heard so far. So I did. I read about her initial attraction to Marcus, her guilt over finding another man appealing while married to me. I read about their first kiss after a client dinner, her immediate regret followed by rationalization that it was just a moment of weakness. I read about the gradual escalation from emotional affair to physical betrayal. But I also read about her love for me, her confusion about her own actions, her growing panic as the affair continued and her feelings became more complicated. March 15th, I read aloud. James surprised me with dinner from Romano's tonight, my favorite since college. He was so excited about the baby, talking about converting the spare room into a nursery. I wanted to die from guilt, but I also felt this terrible resentment that he's planning our future while I'm living this double life. How did I become someone who could lie to the person I love most? Sarah was crying again. but I continued reading. Her entries revealed the full scope of her internal struggle. Genuine love for me mixed with excitement about Marcus. Maternal joy about the pregnancy combined with terror about the eventual revelation. April 2nd, I continued. Told Marcus I can't keep doing this. He said he understood that we should end things cleanly. But then he kissed me in the parking garage, and I realized I don't want it to end. What kind of person does that make me? What kind of mother? What kind of wife? Why didn't you just leave me? I asked, looking up from the diary. If you had feelings for Marcus, if you were unhappy with our marriage, why didn't you just ask for a divorce before any of this happened? She wiped her eyes with a tissue, struggling to find words. Because I didn't want to leave you. I wanted both. The security and love and future we'd built together, and the excitement and passion that Marcus represented. I thought I could have the affair, get it out of my system, and then be a better wife to you. And when you realized you were pregnant, I was terrified. I knew immediately it wasn't yours because of the timing, but I couldn't bring myself to tell you. You were so happy, so excited about finally having a baby. How could I destroy that? I returned to the diary, finding entries from her second trimester. Her handwriting became more erratic as the pregnancy progressed and her deception deepened. May 20th, I read. James felt the baby kick today. His face lit up like Christmas morning and he started talking to my belly about teaching his son to play baseball. I wanted to confess everything in that moment, but I couldn't bear to see that joy turn to devastation. Is protecting him from pain worth living this lie? You wrote that you loved him too, I said, finding several entries where she detailed her growing feelings for Marcus alongside her guilt about deceiving me. I did love him. I still do, in a way that's completely separate from how I love you. He understood parts of me that I'd forgotten existed. My ambition, my need for intellectual challenge, my desire to be seen as more than just someone's wife trying to get pregnant. So this was about me not seeing you? No, James. This was about me not knowing how to ask for what I needed without feeling selfish or ungrateful. You were supporting my career, encouraging my ambitions, being the perfect husband in every measurable way. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like myself and started feeling like just your wife, focused entirely on getting pregnant and creating the family we both wanted. I found an entry from her third trimester that stopped me cold. July 10th, I read. Dr. Martinez asked if we wanted to do genetic testing. James said he trusted that everything would be fine, that he didn't need tests to know he'd love this baby completely. I almost broke down in the office. He's going to be such a wonderful father, and I'm going to destroy that the moment our son is born. You knew he would find out immediately. I hoped. She started, then stopped. No, that's not true, I knew. I knew the moment he was born that you'd see the truth. But I kept telling myself that maybe love would be enough, that maybe you'd choose our family over your hurt and anger. Love was enough, I said, closing the diary. That's the problem, Sarah. I do love him. I felt it the moment I held him, and I feel it every time I see him. But loving him doesn't erase what you did to our marriage. I know. And I know that asking you to forgive me is probably impossible. But James, I need you to know that the affair is over. Completely over. Marcus and I both know it can't continue, not with Elena finding out, not with the baby, not with all the people we've hurt. What do you want from me, Sarah? What's the best case scenario in your mind? She looked at me with desperate hope. I want us to go to counseling. I want to rebuild our marriage on honesty this time. I want to raise our son together and show him what real love looks like, even when it's complicated and imperfect. Our son, yes. He may carry Marcus's DNA, but he's been hearing your voice for months. You're the father who sang to him, who talked about teaching him to ride a bike, who researched car seats and crib safety. Biology doesn't make a parent, James. Love and commitment do. I looked around our living room, at the baby swing in the corner, the changing station we'd set up near the couch, the family photos that documented 8 years of what I'd thought was genuine partnership. I need more time, I said finally. This diary helps me understand your thinking, but it doesn't fix the trust that's been broken. And it doesn't resolve the fact that Marcus is going to be part of our lives now, whether we stay married or not. I know. But James, please don't give up on us completely. Don't let my terrible choices destroy something that was real and good for so many years. As I prepared to leave with my clothes, Sarah handed me the baby monitor receiver. Take this, she said, so you can hear him when you want to feel connected. That night, in my childhood bedroom, I listened to the soft sounds of the baby sleeping through the monitor. Somewhere across town, an innocent child was breathing peacefully, unaware that his future hung in the balance of adult decisions about forgiveness, trust, and what it truly means to be a family. Sarah's diary sat on my nightstand next to my mother's note. Two different documents offering two different perspectives on love, responsibility, and the possibility of redemption. The draft divorce papers sat on Rebecca Walsh's conference table like a roadmap to a future I wasn't sure I wanted. She'd prepared them at my request, meticulously detailing the legal dissolution of 8 years of marriage, but seeing the official language, irreconcilable differences, division of marital assets, child custody arrangements, made the abstract possibility feel devastatingly real. "These are just drafts," Rebecca reminded me, her voice gentle but professional. "Nothing is final until you sign and file them. But I wanted you to see what divorce would look like practically, so you can make an informed decision." I scanned the documents, noting how clinical they made our life together sound. Our house would be sold, proceeds divided equally. My retirement accounts would be split according to state guidelines. Sarah would receive temporary spousal support while she established independent financial stability. "What about the baby?" "That's the most complex part," Rebecca admitted. "Since you're the legal father, you have the same custody rights as any divorcing parent. But given the paternity question, the court might require genetic testing to determine child support obligations. And if I'm not the biological father, then Marcus Rivera could be compelled to pay child support, and you could potentially be released from financial obligation. But James, you'd also lose automatic visitation rights. Any relationship with the child would have to be negotiated separately." I set the papers aside, feeling overwhelmed by the practical implications of every choice. "What's your professional recommendation?" Rebecca leaned back in her chair, considering her words carefully. "Personally, I think you should take more time. This is a life-altering decision that you're trying to make while processing fresh trauma. The 60-day window for challenging paternity doesn't close for another month. But you think I should challenge paternity?" "I think you should be very clear about what you want your life to look like 5 years from now. Do you want to be paying child support for a child that isn't biologically yours? Do you want to be legally tied to Sarah and Marcus for the next 18 years? Or do you want a clean break that allows you to rebuild completely?" The questions highlighted the fundamental tension I'd been wrestling with. My heart told me to stay connected to the baby regardless of biology. My head told me that staying legally responsible would mean permanent entanglement with people who'd betrayed my trust. "There's something else you should consider," Rebecca continued. "Sarah mentioned that she'd be willing to sign a prenuptial-style agreement if you chose reconciliation. Essentially, a post-nuptial agreement that would protect your assets if she betrayed the marriage again. She told you that?" "Her attorney contacted me yesterday. Apparently, she's serious about trying to save the marriage and willing to accept significant financial penalties if she violates the terms of reconciliation." I hadn't expected that. Sarah fighting for the marriage was one thing. People often fought to avoid consequences. But offering to legally limit her financial security suggested genuine commitment to change. What would that look like? Rebecca pulled out another folder. Complete financial transparency. Shared access to all accounts, phones, and social media. Mandatory counseling for both individual and couples therapy. If she violates any terms, emotional or physical infidelity, financial deception, failure to attend therapy, she forfeits all claims to marital assets and accepts minimal spousal support. And in return, you remain married, maintain your legal relationship with the baby, and both of you commit to rebuilding trust over time. I studied the proposed post-nuptial agreement, impressed despite myself by the thoroughness of the conditions Sarah had agreed to accept. It wasn't just about preventing future affairs. It was about creating complete transparency and accountability in every aspect of our marriage. Has anyone ever made this kind of arrangement work? Some couples do successfully rebuild after infidelity, especially when there are children involved and both parties are committed to doing the work. But James, it requires a level of grace and forgiveness that not everyone can sustain. Grace and forgiveness. The words echoed my mother's note and my father's advice about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Could I extend grace to Sarah while protecting myself from future betrayal? My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Just wanted you to know that the baby smiled today." A real smile, not just gas. I wish you could have seen it. The message was accompanied by a photo of the baby in his crib, his tiny face lit up with what did indeed look like a genuine smile. Looking at that image, I felt the same protective instinct that had overwhelmed me in the hospital, the same connection that transcended biology and legal documents. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said to Rebecca. "Of course. Do you have children?" "2. A son in college, and a daughter who's a senior in high school. If someone betrayed your trust but you still loved them, and there was a child involved who needed both parents, what would you do?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "I'd probably do exactly what you're doing. I'd agonize over the decision, seek advice from people I trusted, and ultimately try to make the choice that I could live with 10 years from now. And what choice do you think I could live with? Only you can answer that. But let me ask you this. When you imagine yourself at 65, looking back on this decision, which scenario leaves you with fewer regrets? Walking away cleanly and building a new life? Or staying and fighting for the family you could still have? I closed my eyes and tried to envision both futures. In one, I was free from the complications of Sarah's betrayal, but potentially wondering about the child I'd chosen not to raise. In the other, I was legally and emotionally committed to a complex family situation, but present for every milestone in an innocent child's life. "The baby smiled today," I said, showing Rebecca the photo. She looked at the image and smiled herself. "He's beautiful. And he's lucky to have so many adults trying to figure out how to give him the best possible life, even if those adults have made terrible choices, especially then. Children don't choose their circumstances, James. They just need the adults in their lives to love them despite the complications." I gathered the divorce papers and the post-nuptial agreement, needing time to process both options fully. "How long do I have to decide?" "Legally, you have another month to challenge paternity. Practically, you have as much time as you need to decide whether to file for divorce or attempt reconciliation." Walking to my car, I realized that both sets of documents represented different kinds of courage. Filing for divorce would take courage to start over, to trust that I could build something better alone. Signing the post-nuptial agreement would take courage to forgive, to trust that Sarah could become the partner she'd promised to be. That evening, I visited the baby again, holding him while he slept and thinking about the impossible complexity of love and responsibility. He didn't care about divorce papers or legal agreements. He just needed someone to hold him safely and promise that everything would be okay. The question was whether I could make that promise honestly, knowing everything I now knew about the circumstances of his birth and the adults responsible for his future. My father's military medal sat in its velvet-lined box on the kitchen table, the Bronze Star he'd earned during his second deployment to Afghanistan. He'd never talked much about what he'd done to receive it, but I knew it involved protecting civilians during a particularly dangerous mission. Honor, duty, sacrifice, values that had shaped his entire approach to life and leadership. "You asked me about making hard decisions based on principle," he said, opening the metal case with careful reverence. "This represents the hardest decision I ever made, and it wasn't about courage under fire or tactical brilliance. We were alone in the house. My mother had taken Sarah some groceries and baby supplies, maintaining her relationship with her daughter-in-law despite the circumstances. She'd always believed that supporting the people you love didn't require approving of their choices." "What happened?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him. "We were escorting a medical convoy through hostile territory. Intelligence said the route was clear, but we took fire about halfway to our destination. 3 vehicles, 22 people, including doctors and nurses trying to reach a field hospital." He lifted the medal from its case, the Bronze Star catching the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen windows. The ambush was well coordinated. They had us pinned down, and radio contact indicated more insurgents were moving to surround our position. I had to choose between calling for air support that might harm civilians in nearby buildings, or attempting a ground assault that would definitely put my soldiers at greater risk. "What did you choose?" "I chose to protect the civilians, even though it meant potentially losing men under my command. We fought our way out on foot, extracted the medical team, and got everyone to safety. But 3 of my soldiers were wounded in the process, including one who spent 6 months recovering from his injuries." I studied the medal, understanding now why he'd never displayed it prominently. It represented not just valor, but the weight of choices where every option carried significant cost. "Do you regret the decision?" "Never, because I made it based on my values, not my emotions." I was terrified for my men, angry at the intelligence failure, frustrated by the impossible situation. But beneath all those feelings, I knew what kind of leader I wanted to be, what kind of man I wanted to remain. He returned the medal to its case and looked at me directly. "Sarah's betrayal put you in a similar position, son. There's no choice that doesn't involve pain. For you, for her, for that innocent baby. But you can choose based on who you want to be when this is over. And who do I want to be? That's not for me to decide. But I'll tell you what I see when I look at you with that baby. I see a man who could choose to walk away justifiably, but who keeps showing up because he believes protecting the innocent matters more than protecting himself from pain." We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of difficult decisions and their long-term consequences. Finally, I asked the question that had been weighing on me most heavily. "Dad, Do you think it's possible to forgive someone who's betrayed you that completely? Forgiveness isn't about what's possible, James. It's about what's necessary for your own peace. Carrying anger and resentment is like carrying a heavy pack on a long march. It wears you down and slows your progress toward where you're trying to go. But doesn't forgiveness require trust? And how do you trust someone who's lied to you for months? Forgiveness and trust are different things. Forgiveness is a choice you make for your own healing. Trust is something that has to be rebuilt through consistent actions over time. You can forgive Sarah for the betrayal while still requiring her to prove she's worthy of your trust going forward. The distinction was important, something I hadn't fully considered. I'd been conflating forgiveness with reconciliation, assuming that forgiving Sarah meant automatically returning to the way things were before. What about the baby? How do I separate my feelings about him from my feelings about how he was conceived? The same way I separated my feelings about protecting civilians from my feelings about the situation that put them in danger. You focus on what that child needs from you, not on the circumstances that brought you together. Later that afternoon, I drove to St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, where Sarah and I had been married 8 years earlier. Pastor Williams had officiated our wedding and provided premarital counseling that had helped us navigate early challenges in our relationship. If anyone could offer perspective on forgiveness and redemption, it would be him. I found him in his office, a book-lined space that smelled of coffee and old paper. He was preparing for the evening service, but he set aside his sermon notes when I appeared in his doorway. "James," he said warmly, embracing me in the kind of hug that conveyed both sympathy and strength. "I heard about the situation with Sarah and the baby. I'm so sorry you're going through this. I need guidance, Pastor Williams. I'm trying to figure out if forgiveness is possible when trust has been so completely destroyed." He gestured to the comfortable chairs near his window, the same seats where Sarah and I had discussed our hopes and dreams for marriage. "Tell me where your heart is right now." So I did. I told him about the betrayal, the innocent baby, the impossible choice between protecting myself and protecting a child who needed stability. I told him about my anger, my love, my confusion about what the right thing to do actually was. "Forgiveness is not a feeling, James," he said when I finished. "It's a decision. It's choosing to release your right to punishment and revenge, even when those feelings are completely justified. But how do you make that choice when the hurt is so fresh? You make it in small steps, one day at a time. You choose not to let bitterness consume your thoughts. You choose to see the humanity in the person who hurt you, even when they don't deserve it. You choose to focus on healing rather than on inflicting pain in return. And if I choose forgiveness, does that mean I should stay married to Sarah? Forgiveness doesn't automatically mean reconciliation. You can forgive Sarah and still decide that divorce is the healthiest choice for both of you. Or you can forgive her and commit to rebuilding the marriage on a foundation of honesty and accountability. How do I know which choice is right? Pastor Williams was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. In my experience, the right choice is usually the one that requires the most growth from you personally, even if it's not the easiest path. God doesn't call us to comfortable lives, James. He calls us to lives of purpose, service, and love, even when love is complicated. Sarah offered to sign a post-nuptial agreement that would give me significant financial protection if she betrays the marriage again. Does that change the moral calculus? It suggests she's serious about change, but legal agreements can't rebuild emotional trust. That will require time, transparency, and consistent actions that demonstrate she's committed to being the partner you deserve. As I prepared to leave, Pastor Williams handed me a small card with a Bible verse printed on it. "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Keep this," he said, not as pressure to make any particular decision, but as a reminder that forgiveness is always possible, even when it feels impossible. Driving home, I thought about my father's medal and Pastor Williams's words. Both men had offered the same essential wisdom: make decisions based on principles and values, not just emotions and circumstances. The question was whether I had the strength to choose the harder path of forgiveness and rebuilding, or whether protecting myself required the clean break that divorce would provide. The signed divorce papers sat on Rebecca Walsh's desk with my signature still drying on the final page. After 3 weeks of agonizing deliberation, consulting with family, seeking spiritual guidance, and wrestling with my own heart, I'd made the decision that felt both inevitable and devastating. "Are you certain about this?" Rebecca asked, her hand hovering over the documents. "Once I file these, there's no taking it back without Sarah's consent, and the process becomes public record." I looked at the papers one last time. seeing my name next to Sarah's in the heading that would officially end our 8-year marriage. I'm certain. The truth was, I'd known for days that this was the only choice I could make and still respect myself. The baby's paternity test results had arrived the previous week, confirming what we all already knew. Marcus Rivera was the biological father. That scientific proof had somehow made everything clearer, even though it hadn't changed my feelings about the child himself. What decided it for you? Rebecca asked as she prepared the filing documents. Trust, I said simply. I realized that even with all the legal protections, even with Sarah's willingness to accept complete transparency, I couldn't imagine ever fully trusting her again. And a marriage without trust isn't a marriage. It's just two people living in the same house, managing logistics. The past 3 weeks had been a careful experiment in reconciliation. Sarah had moved back to her parents' house to give me space, but we'd attempted structured conversations about rebuilding our relationship. We'd met with a marriage counselor twice, discussed the post-nuptial agreement in detail, and even spent an evening together caring for the baby to see if we could function as co-parents. But every conversation felt strained, every moment of connection overshadowed by the knowledge of her months of deception. When she laughed, I wondered if she'd laughed the same way with Marcus. When she held the baby, I thought about her carrying another man's child while accepting my excitement about our future family. The betrayal had poisoned even our positive interactions. The baby? Rebecca prompted gently. That was the hardest part of the decision, I admitted. I love him. Completely, unconditionally, in a way that has nothing to do with DNA. But staying married to his mother for his sake would have been unfair to all of us. Instead, I'd made arrangements that prioritized the baby's welfare while acknowledging the reality of our situation. Marcus had agreed to establish legal paternity and provide child support. Sarah had granted me generous visitation rights, recognizing that my bond with the baby was real and important for his development. So you'll maintain a relationship with him every other weekend plus 1 evening per week. Holidays will be shared. It's actually more time than some divorced biological fathers get with their children. The arrangement wasn't perfect. Nothing about this situation could be perfect, but it allowed me to remain a positive presence in the baby's life without sacrificing my integrity or remaining legally tied to a woman who had fundamentally betrayed my trust. What about Sarah? How is she handling your decision? I thought about our final conversation the night before, when I'd told her about my decision to proceed with divorce. She'd cried as I'd expected and made one last plea for reconciliation. But underneath her tears, I'd sensed something that might have been relief. I think part of her knows this is right, I said. We both changed during those months of deception. I became someone who was suspicious and guarded. She became someone who could lie to the person she claimed to love most. Maybe we need time apart to remember who we actually are. Rebecca slid the papers into her briefcase. These will be filed this afternoon. Sarah's attorney will be notified, and she'll have 30 days to respond with any objections to the terms you've proposed. She won't object. We worked out the major issues during mediation. The divorce terms were straightforward and relatively amicable. Our house would be sold and the proceeds split equally. Retirement accounts would be divided according to state guidelines. Sarah would receive temporary spousal support for 2 years, while she established financial independence. Most importantly, my visitation arrangement with the baby was clearly outlined and legally binding. What's next for you? Rebecca asked as we concluded our meeting. I'm going to find my own place, something with enough room for the baby to visit. I want to focus on my business, maybe travel a bit. Remember what it feels like to make decisions based on what I want rather than what's expected of me. Leaving Rebecca's office, I felt a combination of sadness and relief that I hadn't anticipated. Sadness for the death of dreams and plans that had sustained me for 8 years. Relief that I no longer had to pretend I could rebuild trust that had been so completely shattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. I know you're filing today. I want you to know that I understand why you're making this choice, and I don't blame you. Thank you for not abandoning our son because of my mistakes. Our son. Even in divorce, she insisted on that language, and I realized I was grateful for it. Biology might not make a father, but choice and commitment did. I was choosing to remain committed to this child's welfare, even as I chose to end my legal relationship with his mother. That evening, I visited the baby one more time as a married man. He was awake and alert, his dark eyes tracking my movements as I picked him up from his crib. Sarah watched from the doorway, giving us space but staying close enough to provide comfort if he fussed. You're going to be okay, I whispered to him as he settled against my chest. Your situation is complicated, but you're going to have a lot of people who love you and want the best for you." He made soft baby sounds, his tiny hand grasping my finger with surprising strength. In that moment, holding him while Sarah watched from across the room, I felt peace about my decision for the first time in weeks. I was losing my marriage, but I wasn't losing my chance to be a father to this innocent child. I was choosing my integrity over convenience, my long-term peace over short-term comfort. Most importantly, I was choosing to show this baby that love doesn't require compromising your values, that you can be committed to someone's welfare without accepting betrayal. "I'll see you this weekend," I told him as I placed him back in his crib. "Uncle James will take you to the park and teach you about baseball and make sure you know that you're worthy of people who keep their promises." Sarah walked me to the door, both of us processing the finality of this moment. "James," she said as I prepared to leave, "I hope someday you'll be able to forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours." "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "Forgiveness and reconciliation are different things. Sarah, I can forgive you and still choose to build a different life." As I drove away from the house we'd shared, I realized that my decision wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about believing I deserved a relationship built on honesty and trust, and believing that the baby deserved adults in his life who modeled integrity and healthy boundaries. The divorce papers were filed. The marriage was ending. But my commitment to being the best version of myself, as a man, a father figure, and eventually as someone's partner again, was just beginning. The eviction notice had been taped to the front door of our former home when I arrived to pick up the last of my belongings. Bright yellow paper with official red lettering, "Notice to quit," demanding that the occupant vacate the premises within 30 days for non-payment of rent. I stared at the document confused. Sarah and I had owned the house outright, having paid off the mortgage 2 years earlier. "There shouldn't be any rent payments required, James." Sarah's voice came from behind me. She was walking up the driveway, carrying the baby in his car seat and looking exhausted in a way that went beyond normal new mother fatigue. "What's this about?" I asked, pointing to the eviction notice. Her face crumpled as she saw the paper. "I had to sell the house to my parents and lease it back from them. I couldn't afford the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs on my maternity leave pay, especially with the legal fees from the divorce." The full scope of her financial situation became clear as she explained. The house sale proceeds had been split between us as agreed, but her half had gone immediately to legal fees, debt consolidation, and establishing a separate household. My steady income from the financial planning practice had insulated me from understanding how precarious her position had become. "Where will you go?" I asked, looking at the baby sleeping peacefully in his carrier, unaware of the adult chaos surrounding him. "My parents said we can stay with them temporarily. Mom cleared out the sewing room to make space for the crib." She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's not ideal, but it's better than the alternatives I was considering." I followed her inside the house, technically her parents' house now, to collect my remaining books and tools from the garage. The interior felt different, smaller somehow, with boxes stacked in corners and personal belongings reduced to their most essential items. "How's work?" I asked, trying to understand her full situation. "That's complicated too." She settled into the couch where we'd once planned our future together, bouncing the baby gently as he began to fuss. "Morrison and Associates put me on unpaid leave pending an internal investigation into my relationship with Marcus." "What kind of investigation?" "Corporate policy violations, potential conflicts of interest, questions about whether our personal relationship affected client work or resource allocation. They're being very careful to protect themselves legally. The professional consequences were something neither of us had fully anticipated. While infidelity wasn't necessarily grounds for termination, the workplace affair had created liability issues for the company and complicated several ongoing client relationships." "And Marcus?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Elena left him 2 weeks ago, took the children and filed for separation. She's a surgeon. She has her own income and resources. She didn't need to consider the financial implications the way I did." I set down the box I'd been packing, processing this information. Marcus Rivera, the charismatic creative director who'd helped destroy my marriage, was facing his own reckoning. His wife's departure meant he was dealing with his own custody battles, his own division of assets, his own isolation from the family he'd taken for granted. Is he providing support for the baby? He's supposed to, according to the court order. But with Elena's attorney going after everything he has, and his own legal fees mounting, the payments have been inconsistent. The irony was brutal. Marcus had risked everything for a 6-month affair, And now he was losing his marriage, his relationship with his older children, and potentially his career prospects. Meanwhile, Sarah was facing financial ruin and professional exile for the same poor choices. What happened at Morrison and Associates with the investigation? Sarah shifted the baby to her other arm, avoiding my eyes. They found some irregularities in expense reports during the time Marcus and I were traveling together for client meetings. Nothing criminal, but personal expenses charged to client accounts, hotel upgrades that weren't authorized, charges for dinners that weren't actually business-related. So they're firing you? Essentially, they're calling it a resignation in lieu of termination to avoid legal complications. But the result is the same. I'll have trouble finding another position at a comparable level because references from Morrison will be limited. I looked around our former home, seeing it now as Sarah must see it. A space filled with memories of better times, now financially out of reach and emotionally complicated by everything that had happened. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I didn't want your life to fall apart because of this. I know. But James, these are the consequences of my choices. I made decisions that hurt you, hurt Marcus's family, hurt my career, and hurt my own son's security. I can't blame the consequences on anyone but myself. There was something different about Sarah as she acknowledged the full scope of her situation. The woman who'd justified her affair as emotional fulfillment, who'd rationalized the deception as protecting my feelings, was gone. In her place was someone who seemed to genuinely understand the weight of her actions. The hardest part, she continued, is knowing that I did this to him too. She looked down at the baby, who was sleeping peacefully despite the turmoil surrounding him. He deserves stability, security, parents who make good decisions. Instead, he got me and Marcus and this whole complicated mess. He also got people who love him, I said, surprising myself with the gentle tone. You, me, your parents, even Marcus despite his own problems. That's not nothing, Sarah. She looked up at me with something that might have been gratitude mixed with regret. I heard you found an apartment with a nursery room, 2-bedroom place downtown. Nothing fancy, but there's space for him when it's my weekend. I paused, then added, Sarah, I want you to know that even though our marriage is over, I'm not going to let him suffer financially because of adult mistakes. If Marcus's support payments are inconsistent, we can work something out. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't owe us anything, James. You've already been more generous than I deserved. It's not about what you deserve. It's about what he needs. As I loaded the last box into my car, I reflected on the cascading consequences of choices made in secret months earlier. Sarah's life had imploded. Her marriage, her career, her financial security, her social standing, all damaged by 6 months of deception. Marcus was facing similar devastation with his own family, but perhaps most importantly, Sarah seemed to be facing these consequences with genuine accountability rather than self-pity. The woman who'd written in her diary about justifying betrayal was accepting responsibility for the destruction it had caused. James, she called as I prepared to drive away. Thank you for not making this harder than it already was, for still caring about our son, for being a better person than I was. Driving back to my new apartment, I realized that witnessing Sarah's consequences hadn't provided the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, it reinforced my belief that actions have costs, that integrity matters, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the full weight of their choices, while still offering support where it truly matters. In this case, ensuring an innocent child's welfare. The eviction notice would be resolved. Sarah's parents weren't actually going to put their daughter and grandson on the street, but the broader consequences of betrayal would take much longer to address, and some of them might never be fully resolved. The lease agreement for my new apartment was crisp and clean, unmarked by the complicated history that had defined my living situation for the past 8 years. 1247 Riverside Drive, Unit 12B. A 2-bedroom space with hardwood floors, large windows facing east toward the mountains, and enough room for a baby to visit comfortably. I'd signed the lease 3 weeks earlier, but today was the first time I'd spent an entire evening in my new home without feeling like I was temporarily displaced from my real life. This was my real life now. Quiet, independent, and entirely my own responsibility. The second bedroom had been transformed into a nursery of sorts, though I'd been careful not to make it too elaborate. A crib that converted to a toddler bed, a changing table, a comfortable rocking chair by the window. The walls were painted a soft sage green, neutral and calming. Sarah had insisted on contributing to the room's setup, choosing bedding and selecting age-appropriate toys with the kind of attention to detail that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her thoughtfulness years earlier. "It looks perfect," she'd said when she'd first seen the finished space. "He's going to love staying here." That had been 2 weeks ago. Since then, I'd had 3 successful overnight visits with the baby, learning the rhythms of solo parenting and discovering a competence I hadn't known I possessed. Feeding schedules, diaper changes, the particular rocking motion that helped him sleep. All of it felt natural and right in ways that had nothing to do with genetics. Tonight, he was with Sarah at her parents' house, and I was learning to appreciate solitude in a way I hadn't since my early 20s. I'd cooked myself dinner, a simple pasta dish with vegetables from the farmer's market, and eaten it while reading a book about financial planning strategies for divorced parents. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Rachel. "How's the bachelor pad treating you?" "Quiet," I replied. "In a good way. Ready to start dating again yet?" The question made me smile. Rachel had been asking variations of it for weeks, convinced that moving forward meant immediately seeking new romantic connections. But I wasn't ready for that complexity yet. I was still learning how to be James Mitchell, single man, father figure to a child who wasn't biologically mine, survivor of betrayal who was choosing healing over bitterness. "Maybe in a few months," I texted back. Still figuring out the basics. The basics included rebuilding my social connections. During my marriage, Sarah and I had been part of couples' activities and shared friend groups. Now I was rediscovering individual friendships and interests I'd neglected while focusing on building a family life. Last weekend, I'd played basketball with college friends for the first time in years. The following evening, I'd attended a community lecture about sustainable investing, something I'd wanted to explore for my financial planning practice. Small steps toward remembering who I was beyond being Sarah's husband and a would-be father. My business had actually grown during the months of personal crisis, perhaps because helping other people navigate financial challenges had provided a sense of purpose and control when my own life felt chaotic. 3 new clients had signed on in the past month, including a recently divorced woman who appreciated working with someone who understood the complexity of rebuilding after betrayal. "It's strange," Linda Martinez had told me during our second meeting. "I thought divorce would make me feel free, but mostly I feel like I'm starting over from scratch at 43. "Starting over isn't the same as starting from nothing," I'd replied, surprised by the wisdom in my own words. "You have skills, experience, relationships, knowledge about what you want and don't want. That's actually a significant advantage." I'd been thinking about that conversation while arranging my new living room, recognizing how my advice to Linda applied to my own situation. I wasn't starting from nothing. I was starting from a place of hard-earned wisdom about trust, communication, and the importance of choosing partners who shared my values. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. Through the peephole, I saw Tom Harrison, the client who'd referred me to Rebecca Walsh months earlier. He was holding a bottle of wine and wearing the slightly sheepish expression of someone making an unannounced social visit. "Hope you don't mind me dropping by," he said when I opened the door. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd see how you're settling in." Tom's own divorce had been finalized the previous year, and he'd navigated the transition from married suburban life to downtown bachelor apartment with what seemed like enviable ease. I'd wondered if he might become a mentor of sorts in the art of rebuilding after betrayal. "Come in," I said, gesturing him inside. "Perfect timing. I was just thinking about calling someone to come help me drink a beer." He looked around the apartment approvingly. "Nice place. Good natural light, reasonable rent, close to everything. You did well." We settled in the living room with beer and the kind of comfortable conversation that develops between men who've survived similar challenges. Tom asked about the baby, my work, how I was handling the practical aspects of single life. In return, I learned more about his own journey through divorce and recovery. "The first year is the hardest," he told me, settling back into my new couch. "You're constantly comparing everything to how it used to be, wondering if you made the right choice, feeling guilty about the good memories mixed in with all the pain. When does that stop?" "Gradually." For me, it was when I realized I'd stopped thinking about what my ex-wife was doing and started focusing on what I wanted to do. Maybe around the 18-month mark. "And dating?" Tom grinned. The inevitable question. "I started dating about a year after the divorce was final. Made some mistakes, learned some things about what I actually want in a partner versus what I thought I wanted when I was 25. Any regrets about the divorce itself?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I regret the circumstances that made divorce necessary. I regret the pain we caused each other and our kids. But I don't regret choosing honesty and self-respect over maintaining a marriage built on deception." His words echoed my own feelings about the choice I'd made. The circumstances were tragic, but the decision itself felt increasingly right as time passed. "James," Tom said as he prepared to leave. "I want you to know that what you're doing, maintaining a relationship with that baby despite everything, it's remarkable. Not every man would have that kind of character." After he left, I stood in my quiet apartment, processing the evening's conversation and feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, but a sense of being exactly where I needed to be. Doing exactly what was right for this stage of my life. The lease agreement sat on my kitchen counter next to mail addressed only to me, bills that were my sole responsibility, and a photo of the baby from his last visit. Independence and commitment, solitude and connection, all balanced in ways that felt sustainable rather than overwhelming. I was building a new life, one careful choice at a time. The photograph of the baby's first smile was printed on glossy photo paper, capturing a moment that had occurred during our visit to Morrison Park the previous Saturday. He was lying on a blanket under the oak trees, looking up at me with those dark eyes that had initially shocked me, but now seemed perfectly familiar. When his face suddenly transformed with what could only be described as pure joy, I'd been singing to him, something silly about ducks in a pond. When it happened, his tiny mouth curved upward in an unmistakably deliberate smile, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. It wasn't gas or a random muscle movement. It was a genuine expression of happiness directed at me, the man who changed his diapers, fed him bottles, and rocked him to sleep during our weekend visits. Did you see that? I'd asked Sarah, who was sitting nearby on another blanket, giving us space but staying close enough to help if needed. I saw it. She'd said softly, her own eyes filling with tears, "James, he knows you. He really knows you." The moment had been profound in ways I hadn't expected. After months of questioning my role in this child's life, wondering whether love could transcend biology, worrying about the complications of maintaining a relationship built on choice rather than genetics, his smile had provided a simple, perfect answer. Now, 3 days later, I was showing the photograph to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the therapist I'd started seeing to process the trauma of betrayal and help navigate the complex emotions of my new family structure. "Tell me what you felt in that moment," she said, studying the image with professional interest. Complete, connected, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. And now, looking at the photo, the same feeling but also something else. Gratitude, maybe? That I didn't let my hurt about Sarah prevent me from experiencing this relationship. Dr. Hendricks set the photo on the small table between us, next to the tissues and water glasses that had become familiar props during our weekly sessions. "James, you've talked a lot about feeling like you're not his real father because you're not biologically related. But what makes a father real? Showing up, being present for the daily things, teaching him about life, about values, about how to treat people. And are you doing those things?" "Yes, every weekend, every Wednesday evening when he stays over. When Sarah needs help with childcare during the week, when he's sick and she calls because she's overwhelmed." "Then what makes you any less real than a biological father?" The question hung in the air between us, challenging assumptions I'd carried about parenthood and family connection. Biology had created this child, but biology wasn't raising him, wasn't teaching him to trust, wasn't showing him what consistent love looked like. Sarah mentioned something interesting when she dropped him off last weekend. I continued. "She said he's calmer with me than he is with anyone else, including her. He settles faster when I rock him, sleeps better in the crib at my apartment." How does that make you feel? Proud, honored, and also a little sad for Sarah, because I know she's struggling with feeling like she's failing him in some ways. The complicated dynamics of our new arrangement had evolved over the past month. Sarah and I had developed a co-parenting relationship that was surprisingly functional, built on mutual respect for each other's love for the baby and shared commitment to his welfare. We went to his first pediatric appointment together last week, I told Dr. Hendricks. The doctor asked about family medical history, and Sarah automatically looked to me to provide information about my side of the family. "How did you handle that?" I explained the situation to the doctor privately, but in the moment, it felt natural to be there as his father, regardless of genetics. Dr. Hendricks nodded approvingly. "You've created what we call a chosen family structure. It's actually quite common in modern families. Step-parents, adoptive parents, grandparents who function as primary caregivers. The key is that everyone involved recognizes and respects the bonds that exist. Even Marcus? What's your relationship like with him now?" I thought about my most recent interaction with Marcus Rivera, who had stopped by my apartment 2 weeks earlier to discuss the baby's future financial needs. The conversation had been awkward but civil. Two men trying to figure out how to share responsibility for a child neither of them had planned. He's struggling with his own situation, I said. Elena filed for divorce. His older children are angry with him. He's looking for a new job because staying at Morrison became impossible. But he's trying to be financially responsible for the baby, and he respects the relationship I've built with him. That must be complicated for him, seeing his biological son bonded to another man. It is, but Marcus made his choices, and those choices have consequences. I think he recognizes that the baby is better off with stability and consistency, even if that comes from someone else. The reality was that our unconventional family structure was working better than any of us had expected. The baby was thriving with love and attention from multiple caring adults. Sarah was slowly rebuilding her life, while knowing her son was well cared for during their time apart. Marcus was learning to be a father from a distance, while dealing with his own personal crisis. And I was discovering a capacity for love and grace that I hadn't known I possessed. There's something else, I told Dr. Hendricks, pulling out my phone to show her another photo. Sarah's been attending a support group for mothers who've experienced relationship trauma. She asked if I would consider joining a group session to talk about forgiveness and co-parenting. How do you feel about that? Nervous, but also curious. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine ever speaking to Sarah civilly again. Now we're managing to work together for the baby's sake. Maybe there's more healing possible than I thought. Healing doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation, Dr. Hendricks reminded me gently. I know. And I'm not looking to get back together with Sarah, but I'm realizing that carrying anger and resentment takes energy that I could be using for better things, like being the best father I can be to this little boy who smiles at me like I'm his whole world. The session ended with homework. I was to write a letter to myself 1 year in the future, describing the kind of father and man I wanted to become. Not in reaction to Sarah's betrayal or Marcus's presence in our lives, but based on my own values and vision for who I could be. That evening, as I prepared the nursery for the baby's weekend visit, I looked at his first smile photograph propped on the dresser next to pictures of my family and friends. In a few hours, Sarah would drop him off, and we'd have 2 days of simple father-son time. Bottles and diaper changes, walks in the park, reading board books, and teaching him that love doesn't have to be complicated to be real. The baby's smile in that photograph represented something I'd never expected to experience. Grace. Not the grace of forgiveness that others had encouraged me to extend, but the grace of receiving love from someone who knew nothing about betrayal or biology or complicated adult emotions. He loved me simply because I showed up, because I was safe and consistent and present in his life. In return, I was learning that being a father had less to do with conception than I'd ever imagined, and everything to do with the daily choice to put someone else's welfare before your own comfort or convenience. It was the purest form of love I'd ever experienced, and it was teaching me something profound about the difference between family you're born into and family you choose to create through commitment and care. The thank you card from Sarah arrived on a Tuesday morning 6 months after our divorce was finalized, written on simple cream cardstock with her careful handwriting filling both sides. I found it mixed in with bills and promotional mail, but something about the weight of the paper and the familiar script made me set aside everything else to read it immediately. Dear James, it began. I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again in a way that you can keep and maybe believe someday. Thank you for showing our son what integrity looks like. Thank you for not punishing him for my mistakes. Thank you for being the father he deserves. Even when I made that complicated and painful for you, I settled into the kitchen chair where I'd read my mother's note about family so many months earlier, processing Sarah's words and the growth they represented. The woman who had justified betrayal and rationalized deception had evolved into someone who could acknowledge the full scope of her impact on others. He says Dada now. The letter continued. And he means you. When he hears your car in the driveway on Friday evenings, he gets excited in a way that tells me everything I need to know about the bond you've built with him. I used to feel jealous of that connection, but now I'm just grateful for it. He deserves to have someone he can count on completely. The card included a recent photograph, the baby, now 8 months old, sitting up independently and grinning at the camera with 2 tiny teeth visible in his smile. He looked healthy and happy, his dark eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. On the back of the photo, Sarah had written Ethan James Martinez Mitchell, noting that she'd legally hyphenated his last name to include mine. I wanted his name to reflect reality. She'd written in the card, Marcus may be his biological father, but you're his dad in every way that matters. I studied the photograph, seeing familiar expressions that had nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with the daily interactions that had shaped his personality over the past months. The way he tilted his head when curious, His habit of reaching for people's faces when he wanted attention, his particular laugh when something delighted him. All of it influenced by our time together. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. The caller ID showed Emma Chen, the woman I'd been dating for the past 2 months. We'd met in Dr. Hendrick's support group for people rebuilding after relationship trauma, bonding initially over shared experiences of betrayal and the challenge of learning to trust again. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm with the kind of affection that still surprised me with its simplicity and honesty. "I wanted to confirm our plans for Saturday. Ethan's still joining us at the farmer's market, right?" "Definitely. He loves the fruit samples, and you're his favorite person after me." Emma laughed, the sound bringing lightness to what had been a contemplative morning. High praise from an 8-month-old. "I'll bring the stroller. Mine's easier to maneuver through crowds." Emma was a pediatric nurse, divorced 2 years earlier when she'd discovered her ex-husband's gambling addiction and financial deception. She understood complicated family dynamics and the challenge of loving someone else's child. More importantly, she seemed to genuinely enjoy Ethan's presence in our relationship, rather than viewing him as an obstacle to romance. "Sarah sent a thank you card," I told her, holding up the photograph, "and she legally changed Ethan's name to include mine. That's significant. How do you feel about it?" "Honored, grateful, and also aware that we've created something unusual that somehow works. This family structure that doesn't look like anything. Traditional but serves everyone's needs, including yours." The question made me pause and consider. 6 months ago, I'd been focused entirely on surviving betrayal and protecting myself from further pain. Now I was part of a complicated but functional extended family that included my ex-wife, her child's biological father, my new romantic relationship, and a baby who called me daddy despite sharing none of my DNA. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty, "including mine." After we ended the call, I returned to Sarah's card, reading the final paragraph that had moved me most deeply. "I'm doing well, James. Really well. I started a new job at a nonprofit that helps single mothers develop job skills and financial independence. The pay isn't what I made at Morrison, but the work feels meaningful in a way that corporate marketing never did. I'm in therapy, I'm learning to be a better person and mother, and I'm not dating anyone because I need to focus on healing the damage I caused." She concluded with words that felt like a benediction. "I hope you're finding happiness. James, you deserve someone who will treasure your loyalty and kindness the way I should have. Thank you for showing me what grace looks like, even when I didn't deserve it." That afternoon, Ethan arrived for his regular Wednesday overnight visit, babbling excitedly as Sarah transferred him from her car to mine. He'd grown so much in recent weeks, pulling himself up to standing, showing preferences for different foods, responding to his name with clear recognition. He learned a new word, Sarah told me, as she handed over his diaper bag. "Show Daddy, Ethan." He looked at me with those dark eyes that had once shocked me and now felt perfectly familiar, then said clearly, "Hi." "Hi, buddy," I replied, lifting him from his car seat. "Ready for dinner and story time?" As Sarah drove away, I carried Ethan into our apartment, his second home, the place where he had his own crib, his own toys, his own routine that had nothing to do with the complicated circumstances of his conception and everything to do with the simple rhythm of daily care and love. That evening, as I fed him dinner and listened to him practice his small vocabulary, I thought about the letter I'd written to myself during therapy months earlier. I'd described the kind of father I wanted to become: present, consistent, emotionally available, someone who modeled integrity and healthy relationships. Looking at Ethan in his high chair, reaching for me with food-covered fingers and babbling contentedly, I realized I'd become that person, not despite the complicated circumstances of our relationship, but perhaps because of them. The choice to love him had required me to become more generous, more patient, more capable of grace than I'd ever been before. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Looking forward to Saturday with you and Ethan. You two are my favorite guys." I smiled, feeling the kind of contentment that comes not from having a perfect life, but from building a meaningful one. Ethan finished eating and reached for me, wanting to be held. As I lifted him from his high chair, he settled against my chest with the complete trust that only children can give. "Story time?" I asked him, though he was too young to understand the words. He made happy sounds and patted my face with his tiny hands, and I carried him to the nursery where we'd read board books and rock in the chair by the window until he fell asleep. Tomorrow Emma would join us at the farmer's market, and we'd look like any other young family enjoying a weekend morning. Together, the thank you card sat on my kitchen counter next to Emma's coffee mug and Ethan's favorite teething toy, artifacts of a life that hadn't been planned. but had been chosen day by day. Through decisions to love rather than protect myself from pain. 6 months ago, I'd thought my life was ending. Instead, I discovered that sometimes the most meaningful chapters begin when everything you thought you knew falls apart, forcing you to rebuild based on values rather than expectations. Ethan fell asleep in my arms as I rocked him, his breathing steady and peaceful. Through the window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and I felt profound gratitude for the complicated journey that had led us here. To this moment of simple love between a father and son who'd chosen each other despite everything.